So, what actually happens in our brains when we abandon our deepest moral convictions? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating diagnostic framework, one that actually maps ancient biblical categories straight onto our modern psychological drives. We're looking at the anatomy of compromise, basically how and why we so easily let go of our values. And whether you look at these ancient texts through a spiritual lens or just as profound psychological archetypes, this framework acts as a brilliant, absolutely uncompromising mirror to our behavior.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We are going to cover the meaning of true virtue, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, and finally, exposing your internal barriers. Let's jump right into Section 1, the meaning of true virtue.
Now, before we can really look at the barriers standing in our way, we kind of have to establish what healthy actually looks like. Here's our baseline definition, straight from the source material. Virtue is internal moral integrity and doing what is right regardless of the social or personal cost. I really want to emphasize those last few words, regardless of social or personal cost. Honestly, that sets an incredibly high bar for human behavior. It means integrity isn't just doing the right thing when it's super convenient, or when you're getting a pat on the back for it. True virtue is measured in that exact moment when doing the right thing costs you something you hold dear.
Moving right along to Section 2, lust of the flesh. Let's look at our first major barrier, which deals heavily with our internal, visceral reactions to discomfort. The source text brings up this ancient proverb as its foundational diagnosis. Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. It just perfectly identifies the anxiety we all feel about human judgment. This fear, that terror of what other people think of us, is the exact trap or snare that kicks off what the author calls the dopamine hijack.
So here is the dopamine hijack. When the threat of human judgment or social rejection destabilizes you, your brain literally creates an addictive urge for immediate emotional safety. It's basically the ancient equivalent of changing your opinion just to get likes on social media. Your moral integrity gets hijacked by your own biology's desperate need to feel socially secure. You end up abandoning your internal virtue to chase that instant dopamine hit of conformity, validation, and crowd approval. The source is essentially arguing that we self-medicate our deep anxiety of being disliked just by caving to peer expectations.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict we face every day. The source argues we are constantly trading the raw discomfort of standing alone in the truth for the temporary safety of conformity. We would rather feel that fleeting warmth of belonging than endure the cold, harsh reality of standing by our convictions when absolutely nobody else in the room agrees with us.
Now, what's crucial here is that this barrier manifests physically too, through pain avoidance. Our willingness to walk in moral excellence gets completely paralyzed by this desperate craving for personal peace. We only practice internal integrity when it's easy, when it requires zero personal friction. But the exact second obedience demands heavy sacrifice, or maybe causes a painful rupture in a relationship, we abandon those convictions. We retreat into isolation and self-preservation because we are terrified of carrying a heavy burden.
Okay, Section 3, lust of the eyes.
Transitioning into the second major diagnosis, the framework shifts from our internal physical drives to the external distractions of how things look. The text draws on another ancient proverb here. There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death. This perfectly captures the psychological trap of visual distraction and optical appeal. We are incredibly visual creatures, right? We're so easily seduced by things that just look like they make sense in the heat of the moment, even if the long-term trajectory is going to be absolutely catastrophic to our character. This optical distraction creates what the text calls the illusion of the shortcut. Our integrity is literally held hostage because an illegitimate path offers this beautiful, highly appealing alternative to the really grueling path of obedience. We demand a predictable outcome that we can see right now. If a shortcut promises a more attractive or efficient way to get what we want, we let our focus totally shatter and we completely abandon our internal standards.
And you see this in our social standing too, for sure. When a shift in the room or our social circle threatens our status, we so often trade the raw stability of truth for the temporary high of group inclusion. Suddenly, our moral integrity is just dictated by whatever narrative is going to get us social approval. We hide what we really believe. We put on a performance. We sacrifice the stability of truth just to keep that temporary high of social favor.
Section 4, the pride of life.
The source material actually identifies this as the deepest, most spiritual level of compromise. If the first two were about physical comfort and visual appeal, this barrier, it's entirely about the ego. The author maps out this escalating ladder of pride. Step 1 is a false sense of dignity, obsessively protecting your comfort and status, refusing to ever take a lower place. Step 2 escalates into arrogance, where you rely entirely on your own intellect and autonomous rulemaking to feel secure. And then finally, Step 3 culminates in superiority, reducing your entire belief system into a tool for competitive elevation, just desperately trying to look more spiritually superior than your peers.
Now, to contrast all this ego, the source points to the ultimate theological archetype of humility. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. It really highlights the stark difference between a savior who actively refused to protect his own high status versus our daily exhausting obsession with protecting our own position and our perceived worth.
And this brings us to the arrogance of our own intellect, manufacturing self-directed rules versus actually submitting to a raw design. The text explains that we love to treat our own logic and our own strategies as the absolute supreme authority. We just assume we possess superior wisdom, so we go ahead and write our own moral script. But this self-made scaffolding, it's actually just a defense mechanism. It is a way to avoid the vulnerability of submitting to a higher authority's simple, raw design.
And when that pride finally peaks, it morphs into full-blown superiority. The symptoms here are glaring. It looks like forcing external compliance on other people, parading your religious actions or your lifestyle rules for everyone to see, avoiding the social friction of true sacrifice, and ultimately, masking deep-seated internal insecurity. The source boldly claims that weaponizing this superficial righteousness is really just a calculated shield. It's using performance to outshine others simply because we are terrified of facing our own brokenness.
Which brings us to Section 5, Exposing Your Internal Barriers.
As we slow things down here for our final thoughts, the text really challenges us with some intense self-reflection. I want to ask you directly, when social pressure triggers that panic of rejection in you, do you rush to secure immediate comfort by caving to the expectations of people? Or do you choose the raw discomfort of standing completely alone?
Here's another one to think about. When a moment in your life demands a sacrifice that completely disrupts your personal peace, do you retreat into self-preservation to escape the raw agony of friction, or are you actually willing to choose the pain of total obedience over the comfortable security of a compromised life? Confronting those external distractions, the framework challenges us again. When a shift in your social circle threatens your public image, do you let your integrity shatter by drawing back into compromise just to look right in front of an influential crowd? Or will you stand firm in unpopular truth, regardless of how it looks?
And looking at that arrogance we talked about, the text prompts us to consider, when you encounter plain truth that really challenges you, do you defend your autonomy by manufacturing your own rigid rules and self-directed strategies just to maintain control? Or are you actually willing to collapse your intellectual systems and submit?
Finally, the ultimate question of superiority. Are we willing to drop the competitive performance and face our own brokenness? You see, this framework doesn't just diagnose our flaws, it asks if we are brave enough to cure them. So, the next time you feel that urge to compromise just to fit in, ask yourself, who is actually in the driver's seat of your integrity? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we will catch you next time.